Good afternoon, my name is Jeff Rizzo. I'm with McElroy Metal. Today we are going to be discussing the Max Rib exposed fasten panel. We're going to show it in a residential roofing application. So we're going to show you a few of the trims that we use. First we're going to start off with the eave trims. We have multiple styles. This is what's called a gutter apron. Typically you use this when you're using a gutter. We have this as a D-edge. Some people like the drip edge style. This here is called the Denver Eve. This is the one we're going to be showing today. It has certain dimensions here, 2.5 inch down leg, 3 inch over here. Because we have the Denver Eve, we also have the Denver Rake. So we are going to be discussing the Denver Rake and showing the application of that as well. We have the high side tie-in trim, post frame. This is going to be up at your end walls. We call it a high side tie-in trim. We're also going to be showing you the sidewall trim, or the rake tie-in trim we call it. What's nice about this is we can actually make this different sizes. This is also going to be talking about the peak trim. This is something that we use on a mono-slope type roof, and we'll need to know pitch and all that as well. We're going to show you how to use your inside closure strips, your outside closure strips. This is a LP vented closure. So we use this up at the ridge, and we're going to vent. One thing we wanted to talk about, we get customers asking, hey, do I put on ice and water? Do I use regular 30-pound felt? What do I do to apply, and get my roof ready? The answer is, it depends on code. You have to follow your local code. Where I live in Michigan, it is a 2-foot inside wall. So if you have a 12-inch soffit and you do a full roll of ice and water, then you're covered, because the ice and water guard is 3 foot. Myself personally, I always like to do ice and water at least 2 rows up. Sometimes, depending on the pitch of the roof, if it's a 312 and below, I put it on the whole entire roof itself. We have our Epilay, which is an ice and water guard product, peel and stick, high temp. We also have our Hydro Shell, which is our synthetic underlayment. So what you would do from here is you use your ice and water, get it ready, and then you put your synthetics going up from there, past that point. You can either use a staple gun or you can use roofing nails. Do not use plastic caps or the metal caps when you're applying the actual synthetic. What happens is that you actually, when you're walking on a panel down the road and you're putting on your panels and your ridge cap, you don't know where those button caps are, or the plastic caps, so it could telegraph through your panel. Over here you notice that we went up the walls. I took it all the way up the wall. So new construction, this is how I would operate with as far as my ice and water, and I take it into the corners, making sure that everything's nice and tight and weather tight. There's no water getting in behind the walls. Notice too, when we're putting on ice and water, some people ask, you put the drip edge over the ice and water, or put it under the ice and water? If you can do it underneath, that's ideal. Over, it's not a big deal. It's not going to kill you. We have the Max Rib panel. What's nice about the Max Rib panel, it's a 3-foot wide panel, exposed fasten. It comes in 29 gauge, 26 gauge. You can also get it with SMP paint or a Kynar paint, which is better paint warranty. Typically when we have customers or contractors ask us, how do you cut panels? There's different applications for that. Another product that we use for cutting, it's something I found out there, is the Melco Turbo Shear. It works really well. You can cut out stink pipes. I like it because it keeps a nice clean edge over here. We do not recommend using a grinding wheel. What we find is when people use a grinding wheel, then it really does heat up the steel and it shoots sparks everywhere. If you're using a metal blade, a metal cutting blade, just make sure when you are to always put it cut from the back of the panel, and to also, I suggest put like a Palmolive dishwashing soap around the blade or something like that to actually, for each cut, so that the filings don't go flying all over the place. You want to get the filings off the steel. That's one of the main things we suggest. Typically when we have customers or contractors ask us, how do you make sure your screws are all lined up, there's different applications for that. One is we have customers that actually take the steel pre-cut, cut to their length, what they need, and we can cut it to the 1/2 inch. The other part is that once they have it all stacked up for this area, then they'll actually pre-drill the panel. Now, caution, pre-drilling panels is great, but you need to actually, I usually have a paintbrush with me, and as soon as I'm done pre-drilling with the 1/8 inch drill bit, I'll make sure the filings are off, and then I'll use the panel, install it then. You don't want to leave the panel overnight. You don't want to leave it for a weekend where condensation or rain or anything can get into it, because it could, our first call is, hey, panels are rusting. It's not, it's typically the filings that are rusting, and it's because they didn't brush them off. So just some caution as you're putting it on. On the first panel, you have to make sure that you are all lined up. So your panel, we have it pre-drilled, we're ready to go. Typically the eave trim, we have that on. That is the Denver eave, as we showed you earlier. And then we put the closure strips, the inside closure strips down already. Some people put them on as they go, some people put them on before they go. When you're using this type of eave trim, you want to overhang it at least 1 inch to maybe 2 inches tops. The cold climates, snow and ice can actually fold the panel. Okay, after checking the panel for squareness, we want to make sure that you can see here we put down the closure strips beforehand. For our application, we actually put them on first. So you notice in the field here, we're putting a screw next to every rib. The screws that we're using is a number 12 XG. So once we get everything set up, we get it all squared on, we all look good, we want to make sure that we're screwing this down properly. When you're putting the screws down, you want to snug them down. You don't want to over tighten or under tighten. As we go up, we want to make sure that we're in the field and continue on. So you always want to start off from the left side and move to your right, because if you did it in the center, it could create some puckering. You always want to start this way. So as we go, we'll start here. So as we're screwing this down, when you come into a seam, you always want to make sure that you're screwing next to the rib on this side, and then when we go to put the next panel on, we're going to be next to it on the other side. So that way it holds that seam nice and tight. This is the Denver Rake trim. The reason we call that the Denver Rake is because these dimensions match what your Denver eave is. So at the corner they should match. Some customers will ask, so there's an opening here, how do I close it off? What you can see here is I just capped it at the end, came a little long, folded it down, folded it over, just so it keeps it clean and closes it off. If you look at how the screw pattern is, it's typical 2 foot on center. So when I go to set my side ones, is I'll actually use a torpedo level, and I'll check my level here. One thing we like to also explain to customers is when you're carrying panels, you don't want to put your hand here because it has a tendency of kind of moving that rib up a little bit, so it distorts that. So we suggest if you're ever carrying a panel, you carry it like this. You go very gently, get ready, we'll set. My job here is to make sure that we're nice and clean on this line and we're following straight. I always like to do a quick check. So if you notice how it's pulling the rib, keeps it nice and tight. Going through the closure strips. Next, we're going to apply the Rake tie-in trim, or sidewall trim, some contractors might know it as. Still following the same guidelines of using the same pattern that we have. Notice that I close it off on the ends here, similar to what I did over that on that side. You can either use a flat pancake head screw, or you can use a roofing nail. Screw it in. Okay, now we're going to apply the end wall trim, or what we call the high side tie-in trim. Very important to tell us what the pitch is so that we can pre-bend it for you. Notice I have it set up, so we have the outside closure set down already. What I did was I took the actual trim piece here, I put it on top, made little marks on top to know where I'm setting everything, and then I set the closure strips a little bit back. So we want to screw this down every 12 inches. You put a screw, or you can put roofing nails that you use. Typically siding comes up from here, so it'll hide everything. All right, now we're going to put the screws on the very top. This is totally up to the contractor. He can use 2.5 inch or 1.5 inches. You want to go snug, keep it into the deck. You don't want to over tighten with the outside closures because it will dimple the steel. Notice I'm going through the closure strips themselves. Now we're going to put on the peak trim, or monoslope, single slope, whatever you like to call it as a contractor. What we did here was, if you notice, I dry fit this in. I put it in first, make sure everything's nice and tight. I make a mark up on top of my ribs to tell me where my closures are going, and I set my closures accordingly. And again, just make sure you're trying not to dimple the steel. Just go gradual down into it. One thing we wanted to mention is, notice that the trims come with film on them. Please make sure that you peel the film. In this application, we're just doing tests. We're going to be pulling on and off, but you want to make sure you get that film off.